Hello. Today I want to talk about death and dying. I know that this is a sensitive topic, and yet I believe it's a very important one that we should be willing to share about. I've seen two people die, my father and my daughter, one in an intensive care ward in hospital and the other at home. And I want to tell you about them because I believe that it's important for people to know about dying, to make it less frightening and unknown, and to realise that the end of each life is unique. So I'm not pretending that I think that the two experiences I've had are going to be the same as other people's. But nonetheless, I hope that by sharing my own experience, it may perhaps encourage others to share theirs too, and to demystify the whole dying process. This has been particularly prompted by a book by Catherine Mannix called With the End in Mind, and this is an excellent book which I would thoroughly recommend. She talks about the fears of dying, the lack of dignity, breathlessness, and unrelenting pain. And she carefully explains that in most cases, these symptoms can be managed well with no loss of dignity. She likens the role of a palliative care professional to a midwife who can manage the particular rite of passage with dignity. My experience is that both birth and death processes have a natural series of steps, and she explains this further, and that these steps can proceed with minimal amount of medical intervention as long as there is an experienced eye watching over how things progress and knowing whether or when to intervene with guidance or action to help. So my father had a routine knee operation, but afterwards there were complications as he came round from the anaesthetic. His lungs weren't working properly, and because he was struggling to breathe, the medical staff sedated him and supported his breathing with a ventilator. There were hidden complications of an earlier radiotherapy treatment for Hodgkin's disease, which meant that his lung function had suddenly become seriously compromised. We took turns to sit with him on the intensive care ward, and because he was sedated, couldn't talk to him directly, we were encouraged nonetheless to keep talking to him. And there was a remarkable moment that I remember when we brought in a CD player with some of his favourite music and put some headphones on so he could hear the music. And as soon as we put the headphones on and pressed play on the CD player, we could see on the monitor next to his bed that his heart rate immediately slowed to a much slower rate than it was before. Days after this, the consultant came to explain to us that they had tried every means of weaning him off the ventilator, but without success. My mother was clear that if all possible avenues of treatment had been explored and there were no further options available, that she wouldn't want to keep him artificially alive with machinery. And so we made the very difficult decision to withdraw treatment, to switch the ventilator off, and to let him die. In the event, it was extremely swift. There were no breaths, no struggle, and very shortly after the ventilator was switched off, his heart simply stopped beating. He had gone. By contrast, our daughter's death was slow and drawn out. She had an antenatal diagnosis of a life-limiting congenital abnormality, and it became clear to us in the final days of her short life that she was slowly dying. We were so grateful that we had been able to come home from hospital with her. She'd spent most of her life within a hospital context. And slowly her breathing became more laboured and irregular, with different intervals between the in and the out breaths. She gradually needed more oxygen, which we were able to provide for her. And for the last 48 hours of her life, we fully expected every breath to be the last. But for some inexplicable reason, she didn't want to go, and she held on and kept going. And with some really helpful advice from someone at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, we were able to manage her symptoms relatively well throughout this time. My wife held her in her arms for the whole period while we waited, cried, and prayed. And there were longer and longer gaps between the breaths until finally there were no more breaths. She had died. I want to tell you these stories as I feel that the manner of people's deaths is often hidden and obscured in a way that makes the dying process unknown and bewildering to those other than the initiated. I hope it is helpful to hear a little bit about the last moments of these two very special people, and by doing so, that the process of death and dying is slightly demystified. I wouldn't for a moment want to suggest that I'm an expert. Catherine Mannix is an expert, and her descriptions of the dying process match my own.